How does Kansas get this done? What are the keys to the Jayhawks ending the streak and finally taking down Kansas State?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, how's it going? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day, and thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe. And on today's edition, we're talking about the keys for Kansas to come away with the victory against Kansas State. We'll also get into our players to watch for both teams, including our player matchup for the offense versus the defense and vice versa, depending on who you're talking about. We'll also get into a little FanDuel Friday, break down the spread, and a little player props as well. Today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Game Time, and today's episode of the show is also brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. Kansas takes on Kansas State. How does Kansas come away with this victory? Now, as we're recording, the spread has moved a little bit here from 2.5 to 3.5. But I think it's kind of all in one question. Usually I approach this question as, what does Kansas need to do to win? What does Kansas need to do to cover? And that can be kind of a different story. I think kind of the question of like, what does Kansas need to do to win and cover are going to kind of be the same things, just maybe it's a little more maximized here because it is a small, spread. And I think at the end of the day, like, you just want Kansas to win this game. You don't really care. If Kansas wins by 1 point, they win by 1 point, you're going to be happy. You know what I mean? So I'm not even going to approach the covering side of this. Kansas wins this game if what? I think the first thing that I would mention here is they make less stupid plays. Like, I know that sounds like an obvious thing and a dumb thing kind of going into football games, but how many games have we walked away from at the end of a Kansas State game and just said, Kansas made more dumb plays. Kansas made more stupid plays. Kansas made more self-inflicted mistakes, whether it's a dropped punt, whether it's bad special teams coverage, whether it's, I forgot about this one too. Like I've been mentioning, obviously, the game a couple of years ago where you think of the muffed punt, you think of the dropped pick six potentially. The play that I think goes a little bit under the radar is the earlier in the game, Kansas scores a touchdown and the PAT gets blocked and returned for 2 points to Kansas State. And you could say, okay, well, the final score was 31-27. If you take away 2 points for them and give Kansas one more point, they're still winning 29-28. But they went for 2 later in the game because of where that 2-point conversion allowed them to be. If that wouldn't have been the case, they probably kick a PAT in that situation, and had that blocked PAT return for 2 not happened, it's a tie ball game and maybe it goes to overtime. Like, who knows what happens? It's just kind of a different situation. So like, it's just moments like that. It's plays like that Kansas is continually self-inflicted upon themselves. And sure, it's not to say that Kansas State has been completely mistake proof. Like they made a couple of mistakes in last year's game, but Kansas has made the ones that are even seemingly bigger brain farts, so to speak. And so can you avoid those as much as possible and have as many as K-State or less than K-State finally in one of these games? I would also say Kansas wins this game if Avery Johnson doesn't have a takeover game running the football. If Avery Johnson, has 100 yards rushing, has 70 yards rushing, I think it's going to be tough for KU on the defensive end of the football. I do think that, Kansas State's probably going to hit their big plays. They're going to hit some explosive plays through the game. But if you're limiting the Avery Johnson scrambles, that's going to really, keep them down on some of those third downs. And I think also like I don't know, it's just like with Kansas, you saw against Missouri, they did a good job against the QB run with Bo Pribula. You saw them not do a good job in the second half against Texas Tech with Will Hammond against the QB run. So like, what exactly are we going to see? I don't entirely know, but if you can limit his legs, I don't think Avery Johnson is, and again, like maybe it changes in this game, but again, like you look at the stats, Avery Johnson's in the 80s in yards per attempt this year. He's in the 80s in completion percentage this year. If you can make him a passer specifically, I think you're going to be fine with the result of that. Now, again, I say that, watch, he's going to throw for like 400 yards or something, but like, I guess that's how I would be approaching it if I were scouting this game ahead of time. Can you take away him running the football? I think Kansas wins if, in general, like they limit the explosive plays from Kansas State and they get explosive plays themselves. That's something where, because Kansas State gives up a lot of explosive plays defensively, and because offensively Kansas State has lived on a lot of explosive run plays, if Kansas can take those away, Kansas has actually done a pretty good job on the non-explosive run plays, limiting the yards. It's just unfortunate, because it's just like, it's one of those situations where, like, the Kansas defense is basically like, yeah, I'm a really safe driver, except for when I get in a car crash. And unfortunately, Kansas is getting in like multiple car crashes per game, and it's like, oh, boom, untouched 70-yard touchdown for the other team. But the moments that they're not having the car crash, they're obeying the rules of the law. They're stopping at all the stoplights. They're, I don't know, they're signaling their lefts and everything. Like, it's just they've been pretty good against the run, except for the times they're giving up the huge plays. Unfortunately, they're giving up those huge plays too often. So it's like, what are you going to get in this Kansas State game? If you can limit that, you should have enough as a run defense. But if you don't, that's how Kansas State puts up, 30, 40 points in this game. I definitely do think Kansas is going to have to score 30 plus to win this game. They scored 27 exactly on the dot, 27 points each of the last three matchups with Kansas State. You lose 27-47 in 2022. You lose 27-31 in the last time you played them at home. And then you lose 27-29 last year in Manhattan. Obviously, in the case of scoring 30 points, that would have won you the game last year. It wouldn't have won the other two. But it's just like, in general, I think the minimum, you have to get to 30 points. You have to say we cleared what we did these last couple of years when you certainly got to that point. I would say if the defense can make some red zone stops, Kansas State is third in the Big 12 right now in points allowed per red zone possession. So basically, when the opposition is getting in the red zone on the Kansas State defense, the K-State defense has done a good job walling off. KU, meanwhile, is 14th in the Big 12 in points allowed per red zone possession. So Kansas has not done a great job of, bending, not breaking, so to speak. They are kind of breaking when teams are getting into the red zone. If that's something that can change a little bit in this game, that's another avenue for what could be a close game, kind of flipping the script in the same way that Kansas won a close game over UCF with a big goal line stand involved in there. And then I would say the last one here is they close. Apparently, this is something Lance Leipold mentioned in the week leading up, that like Kansas rewatched this game in the offseason, the last couple of minutes of this game. And so I would think, obviously from a rivalry perspective, that's part of it. But like, this one's going to be, they're going to play energized. They're going to play spirited and stuff. And that is a positive. But so with Kansas State. Now, I look at it and I say, this is expected to be a close game. Last 2 years have been very close games. You didn't finish last year. You didn't finish the year before. Now, the year before is a little different. It wasn't necessarily like you have the ball with, I don't know, like you just couldn't get off the field at the end. They had the ball up before. Last year felt a little different because you had the ball with the lead, couldn't do anything with it. You fumble, they go down, they kick the game. When you field goal, you have another chance kind of late. Like, could you get in field goal range? And you just couldn't. And so can you finish this go around? Did the UCF game where you found a way to finish, did that start to, turn the tide on Kansas in one-score games, and Kansas struggling in those close games? Because it's probably, if you're going to win this game, it's probably going to be a close game. It's probably going to have to turn in a game like this. And I think of Jalon Daniels, can you deliver and make those key plays? He made key plays for Kansas to beat Cincinnati. The defense couldn't hold up. So it's not always just on the quarterback, but when you look at Jalon, this would be his defining win. And I think this is the most important game of the Lance Leipold era. That is a lot of pressure. Regardless, you've lost 16 straight. You would think that the pressure should be on the other team. It's not. There is a lot of pressure on KU. I'm sure there's pressure on K-State too, but it's not like a one-sided thing. So can you close, even knowing all that pressure and even knowing the history here of what Kansas State has been able to do in the series? All right, let's get to our players to watch. This is Locked on Jayhawks. Today's episode of LOJ is brought to you by Mazda. And with Mazda, they are moving the game forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There's moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and keep moving the game forward. This week's moment that moved the game forward, I think, obviously coming off a bye week, so we're going to talk a little bit about the week before. But I really thought that Leif Marchand, 50-plus yard field goal that he hit against Texas Tech moved things forward for me right now. And coming into this game against Kansas State, where it could come down to a late kick, it could come down to some key points here or there, having a kicker you can trust to maybe do what Kansas State did to you with their kicker That's certainly a confidence booster, and I think moves the game forward for KU. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can check out Locked On College Football for your second listen every day, and you can give us a follow at LO_Jayhawks on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio as well. All right, players to watch for KU and K-State. Let's start with the Jayhawks. I think the first player that I want to mention here is Jalon Daniels. And I mentioned it. I had a shout out to Aaron Mayer who reached out to me, who's kind of mentioning a lot of the players who have been in the Ring of Honor have had like winning records and had a lot of success against K-State. Now, obviously that hasn't been the case for Jalon, a little bit different time, but like this would be the signature win opportunity for Jalon Daniels. And when you look at what Jalon has the opportunity to do of kind of cementing a legacy, he's playing unbelievable football this year. Like you look at the stats, whether it's EPA per play or yards per attempt or touchdown to interception ratio, completion percentage, like no matter what stat you're looking at, he's coming, in the top 10, in the top 20 of the country. Like he legitimately has been one of the 10 best quarterbacks, in my opinion, in college football this year. And I think that's an opinion that's held by some other people too. He's been awesome. But again, can you do it in this big moment? Now, last year, I thought Jalon did enough for you to win the game. I think it was unfortunate he had the fumble, but that's kind of the thing. Like there's almost like I almost call it like, if you ever notice, me and a friend have a running joke with Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce is obviously an unbelievable player. You can make the argument for the best tight end in NFL history, and whatever you want to say, one of the greatest players at his position in NFL history. If you ever notice, there's always like one play per game that Kelce makes a mistake. It's like he'll drop a pass, he will maybe miss a block. There's always just like one mistake, but overall, the other plays he way outweighs that, and he's still so amazing even despite the one. It's just usually there's one knucklehead play a game. I think Jalon Daniels has Travis Kelce disease. There'll be one knucklehead play a game. Unfortunately, last year at K-State, it was that fumble. And I know you could say, okay, technically there's more, but it's like one, big one that kind of comes back to. But overall, he's been money so far this season. And against K-State defense that will give up some big plays, but also, force TCU and some big turnovers last week, it's going to be really important that he has an efficient game and has a big game for KU if they want to win this one. Calvin Clements, another player to watch for me. Obviously, Calvin Clements is coming off his worst game against Texas Tech in a year that he struggled a little bit. Clements has just a 39 PFF grade this year. That's lowest on the KU offense, just a 12.2 pass block grade. That sounds like a not real number. He's actually given up more pressures than any offensive tackle in the Big 12. But the 15 pressures that he allowed between the Tech and the Missouri games compared to just 8 pressures allowed in the other 5. So it hasn't been as bad in the other 5. I don't think that K-State has the NFL dudes on the defensive line that those teams had. You've also got a Kansas kid, though, here. You've also got a kid that we found out was dealing with some sort of injury. He was listed on the probable list. We heard Lance Leipold earlier this week. Getting the bye week to get a little healthier, maybe that was a little more to the Texas Tech game than we might have thought. And you having a Kansas kid, somebody who wants to bounce back, I'm going to be interested to see if he can. There's still talent there with Calvin Clements, and I've continued to make kind of the Bryce Cable comparison that, Cable it wasn't always sunshine and rainbows his first couple of years as playing for KU. But by the time he was in his last couple of years at Kansas, he was nails. He was money. And I could see that being the case for Clements, who has everything you want from the size, from the body. Like you still see flashes of the play. It just hasn't been as consistent. And there have been those struggles in the pass blocking game. Maybe this is a good first step for him coming off that bye in-state opponent with Kansas State. But they certainly need him to, because K-State obviously watched the Texas Tech film. Like they're going to attack him. So he's got to be ready. And then the last one I want to mention here for KU is Mason Ellis. So Ellis was listed as questionable in the previous game for KU, and he ended up not playing. Now he's listed as probable, which makes sense. You're coming off a bye week. You have a little extra time to get ready for this one. He's another Kansas kid, and I was cognizant of wanting to go with some Kansas kids on this because you just think about it, and they have a better understanding of what this rivalry, I guess, is about. But I think safety is going to be a really important position for KU to slow some of their explosive runs, right? Because if you're making the tackle as the safety, you're probably the last line of defense, preventing it from being an explosive run, but also guarding tight ends. K-State likes to throw. They've got a really good tight end. Now, Mason Ellis hasn't played since the West Virginia game when he got hurt. He played a single-digit snaps in that game, got hurt. And I think it's been a little like undersold how important that's been, not having him. We've seen some KU struggles defensively since then. And Ellis has legitimately like been one of KU's better defenders when he has been out there and healthy. He's got a 71.7 PFF grade, 72.7 in coverage, 87.3 in tackling. This has not been a very good tackling KU defense, but Mason Ellis has done a pretty good job of that this year. I think KU has been missing him more than you might think. I think getting him back in this game is going to be a really big thing for KU, assuming that he is back with the probable listing there. What about K-State? Who are the players to watch for the Wildcats? Let's start with Avery Johnson. We've got the quarterback on both teams. He's obviously a dual threat quarterback. Like we said earlier, can Kansas slow down the quarterback running game? But last year against Kansas, Avery Johnson was really good. He was 19 of 34, so not the best completion percentage, but the overall result was really good. 253 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. He also had 14 carries for 67 yards and a touchdown. One thing that I do find interesting here is even though Avery Johnson has just 2 interceptions, that's the same amount as Jalon Daniels, his turnover-worthy throw rate on Pro Football Focus is 5.2%. Jalen's only at 2.2%. So is that something where maybe there's a reversion? Can Kansas get an interception or 2 on Avery Johnson in this game? But, can they slow him down? I mean, he with Dylan Edwards out of this game, that's one less explosive runner they have. Avery Johnson, is he going to have a takeover game, or can Kansas find a way to force him into some turnovers or make him a little ineffective? Garrett Oakley is one of his favorite targets. He's a tight end, 25 catches, 271 yards, 4 touchdowns. But he's really been on a tear of late, and those are good numbers to begin with for a tight end. But over the last 2 games that K-State has played, he's got 11 catches for 125 yards and 3 scores. He has been a focal point of the offense as K-State has started to kind of revitalize on the season. Garrett Oakley has been a really good player for Kansas State here at tight end, and maybe that goes to Mason Ellis. Maybe, I don't know. It'll be interesting. Like, KU does have athletic linebackers with Bengali Kamar and Trey Lathan. Who guards him? It'll be interesting because he's going to be a common target for Avery Johnson, especially on some of those key downs and in the red zone. And then the last guy here for the K-State defense is Austin Romaine. He's a linebacker, 49 tackles on the season, 2 pass deflections, had a really great year last year. He's backing it up with another one this year, 80.5 PFF grade. He's an 88.6 in run defense, 69.6 in coverage, so at least solid there. Now his tackling grade only a 59.6. That'll certainly be something that's interesting. Is that something Kansas can take advantage of in some way? I do think that sometimes PFF dings some of the linebackers a little bit on the tackles when it's like, okay, he missed the tackle, but he got in there and shot a gap, and because he even hit him and allowed the other defenders to finish the TFL off. But still, he's a very good linebacker. Kansas and Jalen are going to have to be very wary of him on the field. Now, what about our player matchups of the game? Well, when KU's on offense and Kansas State's on defense, we're going to go with Cam Pickett / Emmanuel Henderson versus Quay Moss in the slot specifically. Now, with Henderson, sometimes he's on the flank, sometimes he's in the slot. With Pickett, KU moves their players around all the time. But we've seen both guys be in the slot at different points this season. Now, with Moss, he's a safety. He has 169 of his snaps as a slot corner and 97 of his snaps as a box safety. So he's playing on the inside. And sometimes he'll be matched up, I'd imagine, with Bowden Grown, or maybe a different slot receiver with Kansas. But Moss has been good this year, 72 PFF grade, 74 in coverage. He's been targeted 29 times. He's given up just 15 catches with 0 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. So Moss has been really good. And that's strength on strength because, Pickett and Henderson have obviously been KU's 2 leading receivers so far this season. Plus, in a game where, explosive plays are going to be key, those are KU's probably 2 best bets for explosive plays on offense. Other player matchup on the KU defensive side of the ball, the KU defensive tackles against Sam Hecht. Hecht is K-State's center. He is their highest graded offensive lineman on Pro Football Focus at a 78.6. But their 2 guards are actually their lowest rated offensive linemen on Pro Football Focus. Now, Hecht's been really good. He's given up just 4 pressures, 0 sacks, 99.2% win rate. You want to be like 98% or above, at least at the tackle position, probably a little higher at the center position, but still that's good. KU's defensive tackles didn't have a very good game against Texas Tech, but overall, they've had some solid moments in games this season and been a pretty solid unit in a lot of the games. And they've had some high individual success here and there. can you take advantage of those guards for Kansas State? And then if you do take advantage of the guards, can you win some of the matchups with the center because you're going to be getting double teamed by Heck? So that's going to be, I think, a very interesting matchup kind of both ways for the two teams. And I would say too, like if we're talking about like another matchup that could be kind of interesting, like the Jalon Daniels, Austin Romaine one, because Jalen's been money on play action. 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, over 10 yards per attempt. K-State has given up a lot on the I'm sorry, that's the numbers against the K-State defense. Jalen's at 12.6 yards per attempt, 13 touchdowns, no interceptions on play action. But what's also interesting is Jalon is 3rd in the country in adjusted completion percentage in the intermediate range of throws. So he's been very good from 10 to 20 yards. But K-State this year allowing just 21 of 47 for 368, no touchdowns, 1 pick in the intermediate range. So keep an eye on that matchup too with Jalon versus Austin Romaine. But we talked about both those guys a little earlier. So I guess we're doubling down on it now anyway. All right, FanDuel Friday coming up next. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, and today's episode of the show is brought to you by DoorDash. It is, let's just say it, it's the weekend. Like, time to look back, crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order. These players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For the Kansas Jayhawks, obviously they didn't win the game against Texas Tech, but Jalon Daniels did deliver in a big way. You know, he got sacked 9 times. The pressure was literally on, but he kept delivering strikes. He kept trying to go at it. And, you know, if not for, who knows, maybe a couple 3rd and 1s that don't go KU's way in the 3rd quarter, maybe they're staying in it all the way to the very end. And just like Jalon Daniels delivered for Kansas, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season. You can save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday, keep the streak alive, fuel your game day, only with DoorDash. Terms apply, promo period through November 18th. This episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. NFL season's here. College football's here. NBA, NHL. I mean, everything's going on right now. That's the beauty of October, right? And FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. Pick a bet. Put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. You can get in. We're about to talk about it in our FanDuel Friday. Kansas now, the line is moved to Kansas -3.5. The over-under is 56.5. I kind of think it's going to be a higher scoring game. So if you're interested in that too, you can find that at FanDuel. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, and you can give us a follow at DJohnsonRadio or at LO_Jayhawks, as we will be back on Friday night for a little postcast episode with whatever happens in the KU Louisville basketball game. We'll have a postcast for the KU K-State game later this weekend. I'm not sure when it's going to come out this weekend. I guess, peel the curtain back. It is my wedding anniversary with my wife. Now, the last time we went to a football game the day after our wedding, we got married on a Friday. It was when KU came back and beat Tech on the crazy field goal. So maybe, hopefully, some good, juju there, maybe a little bit. All right, FanDuel Friday on today's episode here. So the spread here that we're looking at now is Kansas -3.5. It was 2.5 yesterday. It's now 3.5 today. Which tells you that money's actually coming in on Kansas late, which, is that a good thing? I don't know. 56.5 is the over-under. I would not be taking Kansas -3.5. That's too many points. Now, I said on the other day's show, I would rather take like Kansas State money line if you were taking that side than +2.5. But at 3.5, I think I'd rather take the spread for them. But I predicted the other day, I got crazy with it and predicted a Kansas win. So hopefully I don't have egg on my face and I'm not sad over the weekend. But the over-under is 56.5. I do like the over there. Like I said, I think Kansas needs to score 30+. I think both defenses can be poked at a little bit here and there. I could see both teams scoring in the 30s. So I kind of like the over in that regard there. Now, looking at some of the player props of this game, the over-under passing yards right now for Jalon on FanDuel is 231.5. Avery Johnson is 210.5. it's hard because it's like with the weather, what it's supposed to be, which is raining and kind of cold, how does that affect the passing game for both guys? Do both quarterbacks end up running it a little bit more, right? So I don't know that I want to touch either of those just in terms of, factoring in for the weather as well. And maybe that is something where you wouldn't want to touch the over because of that. I don't know. But the receiving yard props, Cam Pickett at 38.5, Emmanuel Henderson 53.5, Bowden Gruen 47.5, Garrett Oakley 40.5, Jace Brown 68.5, Jerron Tibbs 52.5. The one that interests me there the most is Cam Pickett at 38.5. I could definitely see with it being more rain related, maybe you do throw a little bit more, receiver screen, short passes, let Cam Pickett make some yards after the catch. So that would be my favorite of the receiving ones. For the rushing ones, the only ones that up there right now on FanDuel, Jalon Daniels 33.5, Daniel Highshaw 64.5. I would be taking the Jalon Daniels. That would probably be my favorite player prop so far. Jalon over 33.5. It's a rivalry game. This is an opportunity for Jalon to get his biggest win in a Kansas uniform. It could be raining. You're coming off a game where you just got sacked 9 times. You probably want to move the pocket a little bit more. That would be my lock bet. And honestly, like you can go to the alt rushing tab, and I don't hate this either. If you want to like ladder it, you do the over on the 33.5. Then you do a 40 plus at plus 118, and then maybe you throw a crazy one on like, I don't know, to rush for 60 plus yards at plus 280 or something like that. You can also get Jalon to that same vein, plus 115 to score a touchdown. High shot minus 125 isn't bad though, because if LeSean Williams ends up not playing, he's obviously questionable. That's even more, opportunity for High shot to be the goal line back necessarily. Bowden Gruen's plus 135. Gosh. Do I dare say the Kansas State defense at plus 700, because that would be classic this series? But yeah, I also think if you want to look at it like the first quarter bet, Kansas minus 1.5, thinking they're going to come out fired up after how the last couple of years have went, and with this game being at home, maybe that's something that they could take advantage of as well. That'll do it for this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. We'll see you next time for another edition of Locked on Jayhawks.